Before anything else, the shop owner asked me whether I could leave one car out of my report. It was July 2015, during a week when the Sacramento area was over 100 degrees before lunch. I handled fire and vehicle inspections for an insurance contractor. Most jobs were dull. The shop was in an industrial strip outside Rancho Cordova, near Folsom Boulevard and the old rail line. It sat behind a tire place beside a cabinet company. The fire had happened 2 nights earlier. Fire tape sagged across the gate, and ash moved over the gravel. The owner was named Ray. He looked about 50, with a shaved head and a new tan work shirt. He met me holding 2 bottles of water. "You picked a bad day," he said. The water was warm. Ray took me inside. The main burn area was in the rear bay, where part of the metal roof had folded downward. The place smelled like wet charcoal and scorched rubber. While I photographed the walls, he blamed the electrical panel, then a battery charger. A minute later, he said nobody had entered the shop since Saturday afternoon. People give confused accounts after fires, so I let it go for the moment. 3 vehicles had ordinary smoke damage. The last sat in the rear corner where the concrete had cracked from heat. It was an older silver Honda Accord. The front end was burned to the frame, but the rear bumper was almost clean. Ray stopped behind me. "That one isn't part of the claim," he said. I asked why. "Customer car. Came in wrecked. We never did the paperwork." There was no plate. The VIN under the windshield was destroyed, and the factory sticker inside the driver's door had been peeled off. Ray stepped closer. "Car was scrapped before the fire. Don't waste time on it." I photographed it. Near the front tire, a dark pour pattern crossed the concrete toward a drain. Orange paint from the fire investigator circled part of it. I had seen fuel-fed fires before. "You can write electrical," Ray said. "That's what the fire guy thought." I told him the department would decide the cause. "Sure, just don't get hung up on the Honda." The passenger door had taken less heat and opened after 2 pulls. Trapped odor rolled out, burned fabric with a metallic smell beneath it. The seat was reclined almost flat. A dark stain covered the lower cushion, with a hard brown edge in the cloth. Dirty water can fool you after a fire, so I took photos and kept quiet. Then I saw the tooth. It was wedged between the seat rail and the center console. It looked like a human molar. The root was intact, and one side had a silver filling. I stood too fast and struck my shoulder on the door frame. Ray said, "Careful." I aimed my flashlight down. "What's that?" He leaned in for half a second. "Piece of a spark plug." It wasn't. There was a smear under the rail. Part of the passenger seat looked soaked before the heat reached it. Ray walked toward the office. I placed a scale card beside the tooth and took more pictures. When I turned around, Ray stood by the bay door with his arms folded. "You done with that one?" I asked for the customer's information. "Don't have it." "Who brought it in?" "Some guy." "When?" "Last week. He said the Honda had front-end damage, but the suspension looked straight." I wrote that down. Ray watched my pen. "How long before I get the insurance check?" I said that depended on the carrier. He pointed at my camera. "You don't need pictures of junk inside customer cars." I told him I had to document the whole burn area. For the next 15 minutes, he stayed close enough that I heard his boots scrape whenever I moved. Near the rear exit, I found an uncapped gas can behind a stack of wheels. Ray said it was for the lawnmower. There was no lawn. I stepped outside for a phone signal and called my supervisor, Denise. I told her about the possible blood in the tooth. She said not to confront Ray and to upload my photos as soon as I left. While we spoke, I noticed a security camera on the cabinet company's wall. It pointed across the shared driveway toward Ray's rear gate. I asked Ray whether the neighboring shop was open. "They don't have anything to do with this," he said. That came out before I finished the question. I knocked on the cabinet shop's side door. A man named Luis opened it with a dust mask hanging around his neck. I showed my badge and asked whether the camera covered the driveway. Luis looked past me toward Ray's building. "Sometimes." I asked if he had footage from the night of the fire. Ray already asked for it. He said quietly. "What did he say?" "He wanted it erased. Said the police took what they needed." I asked whether police had actually come. Luis shook his head. A metal door slammed behind me. Ray was crossing the lot. Luis stepped inside. I pushed my card through the gap and asked him to call me. He took it and locked the door. Ray stopped a few feet away. Need something from him? I said I was checking for exterior footage. Camera's fake. It had an infrared ring and a cable through the wall. Ray smiled, but his eyes didn't change. Come finish your job. Back inside, I kept my phone unlocked in my hand. I took the remaining measurements and packed my case. When I passed the Honda again, the tooth was gone. The ash around the seat rail had been disturbed. The stain had been rubbed with something, and the fabric was still damp. I asked Ray where the tooth went. What tooth? The one beside the seat. He gave a short laugh. You mean the spark plug? I closed my case. I have enough. He followed me to the gate. Before you send anything, he said, understand that car wasn't ours. I said my report would state what I observed. You observed fire damage. I observed more than that. His jaw tightened. Then he looked toward the road and smiled again. People see more than they need to. That's how they make trouble for themselves. I locked my doors before setting my equipment down. Ray stood at the gate until I pulled onto the frontage road. I drove to a gas station near Bradshaw Road and uploaded every photo over the store's Wi-Fi. The air conditioner made my glasses fog. Denise told me to flag the file and send the originals to the carrier. Before I called the sheriff, Luis phoned. He had copied part of the footage to a thumb drive. He didn't want officers at work because Ray had keys to the rear yard. Luis asked me to meet behind a Denny's near Highway 50. I should have told him to contact law enforcement himself. Instead, I went. Luis waited in an old white van and handed me a blue SanDisk drive through the window. Camera time is wrong by 11 minutes, he said. Power went out during the fire, but the earlier file is there. I asked what it showed. Watch it somewhere else. Then he drove away. I plugged the drive into my work laptop. The video was grainy and silent, but the driveway was visible. At 1:38 a.m., based on the wrong timestamp, the silver Honda rolled into the lot with its headlights off. Ray was driving. Someone sat in the passenger seat, slumped against the door with their head turned toward the window. Ray stopped near the rear bay, walked around, and opened that door. He stood there for almost a minute. Then he pulled the passenger upright by one arm. The body moved, but it did not help. Ray dragged the person out of frame. 7 minutes later, he returned alone and drove the Honda into the shop. I copied the video and uploaded it to the claim folder, then called Denise and the sheriff. While I spoke to the dispatcher, Ray's truck passed across the street. He slowed and looked toward my car. I left through the rear exit. I headed west toward Sacramento. Near Matherfield Road, Ray caught up and stayed beside me through 2 lights. At the third, he lowered his window. Pull over. I kept my window up. He held a thick white envelope against his glass and pointed toward a strip mall parking lot. I shook my head. The light stayed red. $5,000, Ray shouted. Fix the report and it's yours. I looked ahead. Then he said my wife's name. He also named the elementary school where she worked. I turned toward him. Ray tapped the envelope against his door. You have a family. Act like it. The light changed. I accelerated and called 911. He followed for another mile, then turned off before a patrol car reached me. I gave the deputy the drive, my laptop copy, and my photos. My report listed an undetermined origin near the Honda, possible accelerant use, suspected blood, and removed evidence. I refused to revise it. The carrier's investigator later said the original file had disappeared from the cabinet company's recorder. Luis denied copying it. His boss blamed a power surge. My uploaded copy remained, but the timestamp was wrong and the image was poor. Ray claimed the passenger was a drunk friend who needed a ride. He said the stain came from a cut hand, and the object near the seat was debris. I was never told that anyone had been charged. The insurance company paid most of Ray's fire claim after another engineer could not rule out an electrical cause. Ray sold the property to a towing company before the review was finished and moved his equipment out. About 2 months later, a plain envelope arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside was a photocopy of my wife's staff page from the school website. Across her picture, someone had written one sentence in black pen. "You got paid too." What I heard from the well was my father's cough. That was impossible for several reasons, but the main one was that we'd buried him 6 days earlier. It was December of 2007, outside a small town north of Kittanning, Pennsylvania. My father had lived there alone after my mother died. The house sat back from a 2-lane road behind a strip of woods. There was an old stone well behind the detached garage. It hadn't been used since before I was born. I went back to sort paperwork and check the furnace. The funeral had been Monday. By Sunday, the house was empty except for me, a few cardboard boxes, and everything my father had left where he'd last touched it. My Uncle Dale also wanted the title for an old utility trailer. He thought it was in the desk upstairs. It started snowing while I drove in from Pittsburgh. Fine grains bounced in the headlights and collected along the seams of Route 28. I had a burned CD in my old Ford because the radio barely worked out there. Inside, the place smelled like heating oil and pipe tobacco. The thermostat read 53. His mug was still beside the sink, and I left it there. The desk upstairs was packed with receipts and appliance manuals. My father saved everything. By 4, the light outside had gone gray. I found the trailer title in a metal box under the bed and called Dale from the kitchen. "I'll get it tomorrow," he said. "Don't stay up all night going through that junk." "I won't. And leave the well alone," I laughed. The well had been a family argument for years. It was maybe 30 feet from the garage, covered by a round wooden lid with corrugated metal nailed over it. My father kept saying he'd fill it. Dale kept offering to help. Neither of them did. "I'm serious," Dale said. "That cover's rotten. I'm not going near it." "Good." At the time, I thought he was worried about me falling in. After the call, I went outside to check the furnace exhaust and shut off the garage heater. The snow left a thin crust over the grass. My boots made a dry squeak with each step. Somewhere near the road, a dog barked twice and quit. The garage door caught on frozen gravel. Inside, the air smelled like gasoline and cold metal. My father's red Craftsman toolbox sat open on the bench. The little radio beside it was unplugged. I closed the heater valve and started back toward the house. That's when I heard the cough. It came from behind me, low and rough, followed by the wet clearing of a throat. My father had done that every morning for as long as I could remember. One cough, a pause, then a second one. I turned around. No one was by the garage. The yard was empty. The sound had come from the well. I stood there looking at the cover. Snow coated the metal except for a strip near the center where the wind had blown it clean. Then I heard, "Hey." It was quiet, muffled. I walked 2 steps toward the well before stopping. "Hello?" Nothing answered. The normal explanation was Dale. He had keys, and a stupid trick would have been like him years ago. But there were no headlights, new tire marks, or footprints. I called his house. Marlene said he was in the shower. While I waited, I watched the well from the kitchen window. Pipes clicked in the wall. Dale called 5 minutes later. "Did you come by?" I asked. "No, why?" "I heard someone outside." He paused. "Probably the garage radio." It was unplugged. "Get in your truck and come stay here. Road'll freeze." That was a bad lie. I looked through the glass again. The cover hadn't moved. "Did Dad ever tell you anything about that well?" "No." He said it too quickly. Before I could push him, a voice outside called my nickname. Not my actual name. The one my father used when I was little. No one else used it, and I hadn't heard it since I was about 12. The phone slipped against my ear. Dale said, "What was that?" The voice came again, clearer. "Come here a minute." It sounded like my father speaking from the bottom of a basement stairwell. The tone was casual, like I'd kept him waiting with a flashlight. Dale heard it through the phone. I know he did, because his breathing changed. "Use the front door," he said. "Get out." "What is this?" "Just leave. Don't go near the well." I should have listened. Instead, I pulled my father's old canvas coat from the hook and stepped onto the back porch. I knew he wasn't down there. But grief can make one impossible sentence feel worth hearing. I wanted his normal voice again. The cold hit my face hard enough to make my eyes water. "Who is that?" I called. The voice said, "Drop my watch." I stopped at the bottom of the steps. My father owned one good watch, a silver Belova my mother bought him in 1981. At the viewing, I saw it beneath the cuff of his suit. The funeral director allowed it. "Watch is down here," the voice said. "Need you to get it." The words came from under the metal sheet. The lid sagged in the middle. One corner had lifted enough to show black space beneath it. "Dad's watch was buried with him," I said. The voice coughed. Then it laughed once. It was my father's laugh, cut short, like someone had pressed a button and released it. I backed toward the porch. The metal over the well gave a small click. "Come on," the voice said. "You can reach it." "No. Just look." I smelled damp stone and cold dirt. The wind was blowing from the house toward the well, so I shouldn't have smelled anything from it. I took another step back. The voice changed. It didn't get deeper or louder. The breath between the words disappeared. "Hold his hand," it said. I couldn't move. That was what the nurse had told me at the hospital. My father had been awake for part of his last hour, but barely. The room was too warm, and his hand felt dry in mine. Once I thought he was trying to speak. I leaned close, but he didn't repeat it. I said, I'm here, Dad. You can let go. Mom's waiting for you." I hated the words as soon as I said them. They sounded borrowed from a movie, but I had nothing else. No one heard me. The nurse was in the hall. The voice in the well said, in my exact rhythm, "I'm here, Dad. You can let go." It paused. Then it used my voice again. "Mom's waiting for you." Dale was shouting through the phone, but I barely heard him. The voice switched back to my father. That was a dumb thing to say. Those were the last words he had spoken to me while fully conscious. We'd argued about calling Dale. I said Dale deserved to know how bad things were. My father opened his eyes, said that sentence, and turned toward the wall. At the well, something struck stone far below. Clink. A second later, it happened again. Clink. It sounded like a watch case hitting the side of the shaft. "Come get it," my father said. My father. I nearly fell going backward up the porch steps. The voice repeated my chair scraping, the nurse asking if I wanted water, then the weak click in my father's throat near the end. That got me inside. I locked the door, left the lights on, and went out the front. My duffel bag was still upstairs. I didn't look toward the well. Gravel kicked under my boots as I ran to the truck. The engine turned over slowly. For a second, I thought the battery would die. Then it caught. As I backed down the drive, I saw the kitchen light through the trees. A shape moved past the window. It was probably my reflection through 2 panes of glass. That's what I settled on later. I drove to Dale's house and parked crooked across his driveway. He came outside in slippers and an old Steelers sweatshirt. "Did you look into it?" Dale asked. "No." "Did you touch the cover?" "No." He nodded. Inside, Dale poured burned coffee and finally told me what he knew. My father had heard things from the well as a teenager. Their father covered it after finding him outside at night with a rope. "What was he doing?" I asked. He said Mom was down there. Their mother was alive then. She was asleep in the house. Dale said the voice copied people and wanted you close enough to look down. He never found out what happened if you did. I asked why they hadn't filled it. Dad tried once, he said. Dumped 2 loads of stone in. Next morning, most of it was spread across the yard. I didn't believe that part. Honestly, I still don't know if I do. I slept on Dale's couch for maybe 3 hours. Around dawn, I woke and realized I was still wearing my father's dark brown coat. The sleeves were too short. I hadn't worn it since high school. Something heavy sat in the right pocket. I expected keys. It was the Bulova. The crystal was scratched near the 2. The band was cold enough to sting my fingers. The clasp had the old dent from a fence post. I had seen it on his wrist in the casket. Dale wouldn't touch it. He told me to set it on the table. The back of the case had popped loose on one side. I opened it. Fresh dark mud was packed around the inside edge of the cover. It smelled like wet limestone. We called the funeral home after 8. The director checked the paperwork and said the watch had gone into the casket. She remembered fastening it. Dale hired 2 men with a backhoe that afternoon. They pushed dirt and crushed stone over the whole well without removing the rotten cover. The first bucket went in. Clink. Both men stopped. The operator leaned out of the cab and asked if there was pipe down there. Dale said yes. There wasn't. They kept filling. Each time the bucket emptied, metal struck stone under the dirt. Sometimes close. Sometimes so far down I could barely hear it. Near the end, when only a shallow depression remained, my father's voice called my nickname once. Nobody said anything. The operator dumped the last load and packed it flat. The clinking continued under the frozen ground until the backhoe engine covered it. In May 2022, at a used car lot outside Detroit, I went with my friend Sarah to help her pick out an SUV. She had just started a new job and needed something reliable for the drive across town. I was only there because I knew a little more about cars than she did, which mostly meant I knew how to spot a bad noise and ask annoying questions. The lot was in an industrial area near Warren, a few miles from the old warehouse roads that run along the edge of the city. It was one of those places with a faded sign, rows of vehicles parked too close together, and a small office made from a trailer. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we walked in. I remember the smell of coffee coming from inside the office, mixed with exhaust from a truck that was still running nearby. The seller introduced himself as Mark. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a clean polo shirt and holding a set of keys that looked like he had too many of them. He acted friendly, but not in the usual car salesman way. He talked quietly and kept checking his phone while we looked around. Sarah had already found a dark gray 2018 SUV she liked. Mark said it had come from an auction and that the previous owner had barely used it. Low miles, clean title, great deal, he said. Honestly, this one won't stay here long. I asked why it was at an auction if it was in such good shape. Mark shrugged. Insurance stuff. Happens all the time. That answer was good enough at the time. A lot of cars really do come from auctions, and I didn't want to be the person who ruined Sarah's chance at finding something affordable by acting suspicious over nothing. We opened the doors and checked the inside. The seats were clean, almost too clean. There was a faint smell of lemon cleaner coming from the vents. Sarah sat in the driver's seat and adjusted the mirrors while Mark stood by the hood. I moved to the passenger side and started looking through the storage compartments. I wasn't searching for anything specific. I was just doing what I always do when checking a used car. The glove box had the owner's manual and some old paperwork. Nothing strange. Then I opened the center console. There was a small stack of printed navigation locations. At first, I thought they were recent destinations from someone testing the GPS. There were maybe 6 or 7 addresses saved. Most were places around Detroit and the suburbs. A few were businesses that I didn't recognize. Then I saw one that made me stop. It was an address for an empty storage building in an industrial area near Pontiac. Below it was another saved location with a woman's name attached. Lena. I looked at it for a few seconds before closing the menu. I wasn't sure why it bothered me. A saved name in a car wasn't proof of anything. People leave contacts behind. People forget to erase phones and navigation systems. I asked Mark if the previous owner had forgotten to reset the system. He looked over faster than I expected. What do you mean? The GPS has old addresses? He walked over and leaned inside. His face didn't change, but he reached for the screen immediately. Oh, yeah. Auction cars are like that. They don't always wipe everything. He started deleting the locations one by one. I noticed he skipped the one with Lena's name. Can you remove that too? I asked. He stared at the screen for a moment. Probably just an old contact. Then he deleted it. Sarah laughed a little and told me I was being paranoid. I laughed too because, honestly, I felt like I was. We were standing in a car lot in the middle of the afternoon. There were people nearby. Nothing had happened. Mark finished the paperwork talk and told Sarah he could give her a better price if she decided that day. She seemed excited. I could tell she had already pictured herself driving it home. Before we left for lunch to talk it over, I sat in the passenger seat again. I wanted to check one more thing. I don't know why. I don't. Maybe because Mark's reaction had bothered me. I opened the glove box again. Under the manual was an envelope. Inside was a printed photo. It showed Mark standing beside the same SUV. He had one arm around a woman I didn't recognize. They were in front of a house. The woman looked happy, like someone taking a normal picture before going out somewhere. On the back of the photo, written in pen, was a date from 2021 and the name Lena. I called Sarah over. She looked at the picture, then at Mark through the windshield. That doesn't make sense, she whispered. We walked back to the office. I held the photo in my hand and asked him who Lena was. For the first time since we arrived, Mark looked annoyed. She was the owner. You said it came from an auction. It did. Then why is there a picture of you with her? Mark took a second before answering. I help people sell cars sometimes. That's all. I asked why her photo was in the glove box. He reached for it. Give me that. I didn't. Sarah stepped between us and said, Wait, just answer the question. Mark looked at both of us. Then he changed his tone completely. Look, there are things you don't know about people. She had problems. The car was recovered. That's all. Recovered from where? He didn't say. That was the part that stayed with me. He had an answer ready, but not a full one. I searched Lena's name on my phone while Sarah kept talking to him. The first results were local news pages. A woman with that name had disappeared almost a year earlier. She was last seen in the Detroit area. There wasn't much information, but enough that I recognized the name. I didn't read every article. I didn't need to. I walked back to Sarah and showed her the screen. Her face changed. She asked Mark if he knew about the missing woman. He stopped smiling. You should leave. That was all he said. Not, you're mistaken. Not, that's a different person. Just leave. Sarah grabbed her purse. We got into my car and drove away. I expected Mark to follow us or call. He didn't. We drove several miles before either of us spoke. Then Sarah said something that made me pull over. I already paid him. I thought she was joking. What? The deposit. Yesterday. She showed me the receipt on her phone. She had found the listing online and contacted the lot before asking me to come. She had sent money to hold the vehicle. I asked her why she didn't tell me. Because I knew you would start checking everything. That part was true. Then she showed me the next message. It was from Mark. It had her address. Not just the city, her actual home address. She had never given it to him. She said maybe it was from the financing paperwork. Maybe she typed it somewhere and forgot. We sat there trying to come up with normal explanations because there had to be one. A few days later, she canceled the deal and got her deposit back after arguing with the company that handled the payment. She bought a different car from a dealership instead. The strange part is that Mark never contacted us again. No angry messages, no threats, nothing. That should have been the end of it. But that evening, when Sarah got home from work, she called me. The SUV was parked outside her house. She lived in a quiet neighborhood north of Detroit, on a street where everyone knew each other's cars. She said she saw it from her kitchen window and thought she was imagining it. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were inside. On the passenger seat was the purchase agreement with her signature at the bottom. She had never signed it. She took pictures and called the police. While she waited, she checked her doorbell camera. The camera showed the SUV arriving, but the video skipped from an empty street to the car already sitting there. Her neighbor had a camera facing the road too. Same thing. The car appeared in the footage with no person walking up to it. By morning, the SUV was gone. There was no record of it leaving. The police didn't find anything useful. The lot claimed they had no idea what we were talking about. Sarah never got another message from Mark. A month later, I asked her if she ever found out where the SUV went. She said she didn't want to know. I didn't blame her. The whole thing had already cost her enough. A few weeks after that, I drove past the area where the car lot had been. I wasn't planning to stop. I just happened to be nearby after visiting someone in Sterling Heights. The sign was gone. The trailer office was still there, but the lot looked empty. The weeds around the fence were taller, and there were only a few vehicles parked behind the gate. I slowed down for a second, mostly because I wanted to see if Mark was still there. He wasn't. I never found out if the police connected him to anything. Sarah didn't want updates, and I understood why. The only thing I know for sure is that a car we were told belonged to an auction ended up outside her house with paperwork she never signed sitting inside, and somehow the camera across the street never caught anyone bringing it there. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm glad you made it to the end. Drop a comment and tell me which 4chan story was your favorite. And if you're hungry for more creepy stuff, check out the other vids on the channel. See you soon, bye.